Andrew Caldwell stood in the center of his grand living room, once decorated with priceless art and expensive furniture, now stripped of its most valuable pieces. The dark marble floor, usually shining under the glow of chandeliers, was now cluttered with scattered documents and unopened letters. His heart raced as he picked up a thick envelope marked, "Final Notice." The heavy silence in the once lively mansion felt like a ghostly reminder of how far he had fallen. Outside, city lights flickered beyond the towering windows, but the glow no longer brought him comfort. Instead, they seemed to mock him, reminding him of his failures. Every step he took echoed around the empty space. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, this place had been filled with laughter, music, and many important guests, business tycoons, movie stars, and even politicians. He was alone that night. Even the house staff, once so loyal, had left. Most couldn't handle the uncertainty of unpaid wages and a future without job security. His wife Charlotte was nowhere to be found. She had taken her jewelry and gone, leaving behind a note that said little more than, "I can't live like this." The sight of her walk-in closet, now bare, was as cold as the draft blowing in from the hallway. Andrew had called out her name earlier, thinking she might be in the East Wing, but his voice bounced back at him with no reply. Andrew sank into an oversized leather chair near the fireplace. Though the flames had been extinguished for weeks to cut costs, piles of letters threatened to spill across the chair's arm. Bills, demands, and threats all blended together in a mess of official seals and red stamps. He was no longer the powerful billionaire whose name made headlines for bold business moves. He was a man on the brink of absolute ruin. In his mind, he replayed the phone calls from bankers and lawyers warning that everything his business empire, his assets, his house was on the line. He cursed the partners who vanished when things went bad. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he tried to recall the last time he felt safe or loved. It seemed like an eternity. Suddenly, a light flickered on in the hallway. Andrew jumped to his feet, startled. He expected only darkness. But there, standing with a small flashlight, was someone he hardly noticed in his times of wealth. She held a tray with a simple meal bowl of soup and a piece of bread. He looked at her, confused. "Why are you still here?" he asked, his voice rough from lack of sleep. There was no anger in his tone, just exhaustion. "I stayed because I believe you need help, Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, stepping forward. "You haven't eaten all day." Andrew felt a wave of shame. He couldn't remember the last time he spoke more than a handful of words to Clara. In the past, he only saw her as part of the staff. He'd greet her politely, maybe thank her once in a while, but never learned her story. She was just there, someone who cleaned, cooked, and served. Yet, she was the only person here now, offering him warmth in his darkest moment. He took the soup from her but couldn't bring himself to drink it. His chest tightened at the realization everything he had once taken for granted was gone. His eyes filled with tears, and the soup trembled in his hands. Clara reached for his shoulder. "You're not alone, Mr. Caldwell," she said gently. "I'm here to help." Overwhelmed by this simple act of kindness, Andrew felt his knees weaken. He sank back into the chair, clinging to the tray like a lifeline. He didn't know what to say. But in that single moment, he realized he had lost more than just money. He had lost friends, family, and the dignity he once wore so proudly. Cracks in the empire. After that unsettling night, Andrew found himself forced to confront his situation. Once, he had been at the top of his game, his name on the front pages of business magazines, his real estate deals shaping the city's skyline, and his net worth reaching places he never imagined. Early in his career, Andrew had started a small construction company that specialized in building eco-friendly homes. As the world shifted toward sustainable living, his company soared. Investors lined up, and soon Andrew branched into other ventures: technology, entertainment, and even luxury retail. Each new venture added to his fame and fortune. However, growth can come at a cost. Andrew borrowed heavily to expand, taking out massive loans that banks were more than willing to offer. After all, he was Andrew Caldwell, the man with the golden touch. But behind his confident public appearance, Andrew worried. Something was telling him that the foundation wasn't as strong as it appeared. He ignored the voice in his head and pressed forward, believing it was just jitters. Charlotte, his wife, was thrilled by the newfound wealth. She threw grand parties, traveled to exotic places, and collected jewelry. Andrew thought she was happy with him, that their love was growing stronger with each success. They had met through a mutual friend when Andrew's company was on the rise. She was elegant, well-spoken, and seemed to capture any room she entered. For a while, Andrew felt proud that such a refined woman stood by his side. But as he focused more on business deals and expansions, Andrew started to sense a change. Charlotte spent more time with her social circle and less time at home. He was often buried in negotiations and meetings, so he accepted her absence as part of the lifestyle they both embraced. That was his first mistake. He assumed that as long as they had money and security, love would follow. What he didn't realize, Clara, on the other hand, had been hired through a professional agency. Andrew's estate needed extra staff to manage the large property, and Clara's experience made her an ideal candidate. She had a knack for organization and a gentle demeanor that put the rest of the staff at ease. She arrived early, left late, and rarely took time off. He barely noticed her quiet presence. But Clara saw more than she ever let on. She noticed how Andrew's brow creased when he thought no one was looking. She noticed Charlotte's coolness toward him and how she lit up only around other wealthy socialites. Clara understood that the brilliance of Andrew's empire was hiding cracks. Still, she kept a respectful distance. She told herself it wasn't her place to interfere. After all, Andrew was her employer, and he was married. Then came the day when everything began to crumble. A major investor backed out at the worst possible time, causing a chain reaction that brought the entire empire to its knees. Loans were called in. Andrew found himself in a whirlwind of demands he couldn't meet. News outlets rushed to report the dramatic downfall of the famous billionaire who had soared too high, too fast. Andrew's carefully built image collapsed. Charlotte was the first to show her true colors. When the private jet was grounded and the expensive gifts stopped coming, her patience wore thin. At first, she complained about having to cut back on luxuries. Then she grew cold and distant. One morning, she packed a few bags, took the most precious jewelry, and left a short note on the kitchen counter. Andrew's name wasn't even on the note. It just said, "I've had enough of this. I can't live like someone who has no means. I deserve better." And just like that, she was gone. The staff began to leave too. Some asked politely for letters of recommendation. Others simply didn't show up after payday, sensing they might not get paid at all next time. Soon the once bustling mansion was empty except for Andrew and a few loyal employees. Clara was among them. While everyone else hurried to find new jobs, she remained, quietly doing her work. But Andrew noticed something that morning, after Charlotte left. He noticed Clara running her hand over a small photo in her pocket, a sad look in her eyes. He had never bothered to learn about her personal life. Had she lost someone? Did she have family somewhere else? He realized he knew nothing about this gentle maid who had chosen to stay when everyone else fled. Andrew tried to push these thoughts aside as he made desperate calls to banks and creditors. But each call ended the same: no solutions, no mercy. Though he had built so much, the ground was now slipping beneath his feet. The first spark one evening, after another long day of calls and meetings, Andrew found Clara dusting his large bookshelf in the study. Usually, he would just walk past, but this time he stopped. "Why are you still here, Clara?" he asked. The question came out harsher than he intended. She paused mid-wipe and turned around. "Because you need help, Mr. Caldwell, and I promised myself I would stay until it was no longer possible." "Where will you go if I can't pay you?" he pressed, his voice softer. He realized he was crossing a line, prying into her personal affairs. Clara placed the cloth on the shelf and stood with her hands clasped. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do know that I made a commitment. Money is important, of course, but so is loyalty. You've been good to me, in your own way. You've always paid on time. You never treated me poorly. I can't leave you alone like this." Andrew's chest tightened. He wanted to argue that he hadn't done much for her beyond a paycheck. Yet, the warmth in her words made him pause. For a moment he felt a flicker of something he couldn't describe. Was it gratitude, relief, or guilt for not being that kind to her before? He cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said, feeling his cheeks warm slightly. It had been a long time since he thanked anyone sincerely. "If there's anything you need, anything at all, please let me know." Clara gave a small, respectful nod. She returned to her work, and Andrew retreated to his desk, lost in thoughts of how wrong he had been about the people in his life. The one person who stayed didn't have expensive tastes or demands. She was just there, trying her best to make a dark time less grim. Days passed, and Andrew found himself opening up to Clara. It started with small questions. "How was your weekend?" Or, "Did you rest well?" One afternoon, as she served him a simple lunch because the chef had left, he asked about her family. He learned that Clara had grown up in a small town, raised by her grandmother. She came to the city for better opportunities and had been working different housekeeping jobs before ending up at his mansion. She had her own burdens. There was a younger sister back home who needed help with medical bills, a father who had passed away, and a mother she never knew. When Andrew asked her why, she just shrugged gently and smiled. "I like being useful," she said. "I know there are people who have no one. If I can ease someone's day, I feel like I've done something right." Andrew felt an ache in his chest as he listened. In all his years of building an empire, he had surrounded himself with flashy people who only talked about profits, acquisitions, and success. No one ever spoke so simply, with such honest kindness. It was like a new language for him, one that seemed both gentle. That night, Andrew lay in bed, the shadows from the window stretching across his once luxurious room. He had no idea how long the lights would remain on, but he felt a small spark of hope. Someone believed in him not because of his money, but because they saw value in helping him when he was at his lowest. Hard decisions, financial pressures mounted. Each day, new documents arrived, demanding payments he couldn't make. He had sold off many of his assets to keep the mansion for a bit longer, hoping to find a last-minute investor or a miracle. But the days turned to weeks, and the miracle never came. Finally, the day arrived when Andrew's lawyers informed him he had no choice. The mansion had to go. He would have to file for bankruptcy and vacate the property. The banks gave him a short extension to gather his belongings. It was a reality Andrew never thought he would face. The empire he had built from scratch had crumbled. He broke the news to Clara one afternoon as she prepared a simple dinner in the kitchen, which once boasted a team of gourmet chefs. Her hand froze on the ladle as she absorbed his words. "So, this is it?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the steaming pot. Andrew nodded, his voice tight. "I'm afraid so. I don't know where I'll go. I might have to rent a small apartment until I figure out my next move. I wish I could keep you on, but—" "You don't have to explain," Clara interrupted gently. She turned off the stove and took a deep breath. He expected her to pack up and leave immediately, but she stayed, finishing the meal. They sat together at the small breakfast table by the window, quietly eating the basic soup, The silence was heavy. Andrew thought about the lavish dinners he used to enjoy with Charlotte wine flowing, exotic dishes on the table. Now, a simple soup shared with Clara felt more meaningful. After dinner, Andrew started to make calls to find a modest place to live. He planned to let Clara know as soon as possible where he was going, so she could decide for herself what came next. But before he could finalize anything, Clara knocked on his study door. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, her voice soft, "I know this might be unusual, but I was wondering if you might consider my grandmother's old house. It's small and in need of repair, but it's been sitting empty for a while. I own it now, and my family doesn't use it." Andrew looked up, stunned. "You want me to stay at your grandmother's house?" Clara's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I just hate the thought of you struggling to find a place when there's a small house just sitting there. It's in my hometown, a couple of hours away. There's no rent to worry about. You could stay as long as you need." Andrew leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed by her offer. It was humbling. He had been a man of great fortune, yet he now stood on the brink of homelessness, and the only person extending a hand was his maid. His first instinct was to refuse out of pride, but desperation and Clara's genuine concern made him reconsider. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, rubbing the back of his neck. "I appreciate it, but that's a big step. Are you sure?" She nodded. "I'm sure. I'll even help you settle in if you like. There's not much furniture there, but I can make it comfortable." Andrew studied her face for any sign of pity or hidden motive. He saw none. He saw only sincerity. "All right," he finally said, his voice shaking. "Thank you. I don't deserve your kindness." Clara smiled, and for the first time in weeks, Andrew saw a gentle light that made him believe maybe all wasn't lost. Farewell to the mansion. The next week was a frenzy of packing and goodbyes. Andrew's last possessions were either sold. The mansion, stripped of its grand furnishings, looked more like an empty shell than the home where he once entertained the world's elite. His footsteps echoed eerily through the corridors as he took a final tour. He passed by the main hall where he used to host lavish galas. He walked through the dining room where important deals were made over 5-course meals. He stopped by Charlotte's old dressing room. The vanity table was bare, the mirrors reflecting nothing but emptiness. It struck him that her departure hurt more than the loss of the house, but a bitter part of him realized she had never truly been his partner. She only loved the comfort his money gave her. Clara found him standing by the open front doors, looking out at the once immaculate gardens, now overgrown. She placed a hand on his arm. He swallowed hard. "Yes, let's go." They loaded the last of the boxes into a small moving van. The driver, hired for the day, kept glancing at Andrew with a look that hovered between pity and disbelief. Andrew ignored it. He climbed into his old car, which he managed to keep after selling his fleet of luxury vehicles. Clara sat in the passenger seat. She gave him a nod, as if to say everything would be okay. They pulled out of the estate gates for the last time. Andrew didn't look back. He couldn't bear to see the building that had once symbolized his dreams, now a mere trophy for the bank to seize. A new beginning in a humble home. The drive to Clara's hometown was long and quiet. Outside the city, the landscape changed to rolling hills and open fields. Andrew stared at the passing scenery, feeling a mixture of dread and cautious hope. He was thankful to have a roof over his head, but uncertain about what kind of life awaited him in this rural area. When they arrived, the small house sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by a garden that had seen better days. The walls showed signs of age, paint peeling in places. The fence was partially broken. It was a far cry from his old mansion, but at least it was a place to rest his head. Clara helped Andrew unload the boxes. Inside, the house had only a couple of old chairs, a couch that looked well worn, Clara placed a sheet over one of the mattresses she had brought from storage. "This will be your room," she said. "I'll stay in the smaller room at the end. I used to sleep there when I visited Grandma. There's no luxury here, but it's cozy once we clean it up." Andrew walked around, noting the cracked floor tiles and the flickering overhead light. Yet, for all its flaws, the house felt unexpectedly welcoming. It was real and honest, much like Clara herself. They spent the next few days cleaning and fixing small things. Clara scrubbed the kitchen counters while Andrew replaced some light bulbs and patched a minor leak under the sink. He realized he hadn't done such hands-on work in years. It was oddly satisfying to roll up his sleeves and repair something himself. At the end of each day they were exhausted, but Andrew felt a sense of accomplishment that he hadn't felt in a long time. During breaks, they sat on the porch steps, sipping cheap coffee from mismatched mugs. Clara told stories about the town how as a child. She used to run through the fields with her sister, picking wildflowers for her grandmother. Andrew found himself listening intently, picturing a young Clara with bright eyes and a carefree smile. He talked a bit about his own childhood too, though it was a far cry from Clara's. He grew up in a modest neighborhood, but even then his ambition was to escape to something bigger. He told her about his first small business at age 15, mowing lawns to earn pocket money. She laughed, imagining him pushing a lawnmower. "I guess you've always been a hard worker," she said, eyes sparkling with admiration. Andrew blushed. He hadn't felt pride in a while, but hearing her say that lit a small flame in his heart. He cleared his throat, suddenly shy. "You're the real hard worker here," he replied. "You do so much, and you've never asked for anything in return." Her cheeks warmed with a soft smile, and for a moment they just sat there in comfortable silence, enjoying the view of the rolling hills and the sound of the wind passing through the old trees. Facing the past, not everything was easy. Andrew's phone still rang with calls from lawyers about ongoing legal matters, bankruptcy filings, and potential lawsuits. Some old partners wanted to blame him for the collapse, trying to shift responsibility. He spent hours each day in tense conversations. Clara noticed how these calls affected him. She watched him pace across the tiny living room, raking his hand through his hair. One afternoon, when he hung up after a particularly stressful call, she stood in the doorway. "Mr. Caldwell, are you okay?" she asked quietly. "No," he admitted, dropping into the worn couch. "They're threatening lawsuits. I could lose what little I have left." Clara approached, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You'll get through this. You're not alone." He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. "I appreciate it, Clara, but I'm so tired of all this. I'm tired of feeling like a failure." She hesitated, then sat beside him, her hand still on his shoulder. "You're not a failure. You took risks, and things went wrong, but you're still here, trying to fix it." Her words brought a lump to his throat. Nobody had spoken to him with such understanding in a long time. He turned to her, finding comfort in her calm gaze. "What would I do without you?" he whispered, half to himself. She said nothing, just gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before standing up and going to the kitchen to start on dinner. Andrew watched her go, a wave of emotion washing over him. Glimpses of affection. As the weeks went by, Andrew and Clara settled into a routine. They woke early, tidied the house, and handled whatever task the day demanded. Sometimes Andrew dealt with lingering legal problems. Sometimes he tried to find small freelance jobs online, hoping to start rebuilding his life. Meanwhile, Clara cleaned, cooked. Their conversations grew more personal. Andrew found himself confiding in Clara. About his regret show, he wished he had spent more time doing things that mattered, like charity or even simple hobbies, instead of chasing bigger deals. He admitted he was lonely even when he had wealth. Clara listened with open ears, never judging him. In turn, Clara shared her own dreams. She revealed she once considered studying nursing, wanting to help people in a more direct way, but her grandmother's illness had forced her to find work instead of going to school. Andrew felt a pang of guilt. He had once had the means to help people like her but never bothered. Now, it was too late for grand gestures, but he was determined to do something, anything, to help Clara achieve her dreams. One evening, they sat together after a simple meal. The small living room was dim, lit by a single lamp. The gentle hum of crickets filled the silence outside. Andrew mustered courage and turned to Clara. "I was thinking," he began, "when things settle down, I don't have much money now, but maybe I can figure out something. Loans, scholarships, something." Clara's eyes widened. She set down the mug of tea she was holding. "You'd do that?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Andrew nodded. "It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "But let's take one day at a time. You have to rebuild first." He couldn't deny the truth in her words. He needed to stabilize himself before he could offer help. But just the idea that he could one day repay her kindness gave him fresh motivation. The night breeze drifted through the open window, ruffling the curtains. Andrew felt an urge to hold Clara's hand or do something to show his growing affection, but he hesitated, uncertain of her feelings. Did she see him as just a man who needed help? Or was there a chance she felt something more? Unexpected reunion word spread around the small town that Andrew Caldwell's a billionaire was living there. Many locals didn't recognize him, but a few did after seeing old headlines. Some sneered at the fallen businessman. Others were curious. Clara shielded Andrew from gossip as best she could, but news traveled fast in close-knit communities. One day, while Andrew was purchasing a few groceries at the local market, he ran into an old acquaintance, Victor Walsh, a distant relative of one of Andrew's former business partners. Victor recognized him immediately and wasted no time digging into the scandal. "Andrew Caldwell? In our little town? Never thought I'd see the day," Victor said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He was a short, round man with a loud voice, the kind who relished others' misfortunes. "I heard about your meltdown. Must be tough going from mansions to farmhouses." Andrew tightened his grip on the small grocery bag. He kept his voice steady. "It's a different life, but I'm managing." Victor snorted. "Heard your wife left you. She's with some big-shot businessmen now, rumor has it." At the mention of Charlotte, Andrew's stomach turned. He forced himself to remain calm. "I'd rather not talk about my private life." Victor smirked, leaning in. Sure. But you know, my cousin always said you'd get in over your head one day." Andrew stared at him, anger bubbling beneath his composure. He wanted to lash out, but he also knew it wouldn't accomplish anything. Instead, he gave a curt nod. "Have a nice day, Victor." He left the store without another word, heart pounding with a mix of shame and anger. The moment he stepped outside, he spotted Clara waiting in the car, concern etched on her face. Clearly, she had witnessed the tense conversation through the window. "Are you okay?" she asked softly as he slid into the driver's seat. Andrew exhaled sharply, trying to let go of his tension. "I will be. Let's just go home." She nodded, and they drove off in silence, the sun setting behind them. Though Andrew tried to brush off Victor's cruel words, they weighed heavily on him. He wasn't just dealing with financial loss. He was facing the judgments of people who once envied his wealth. He realized that in the eyes of many, he was now fair game for ridicule. That night, after Clara went to her room, Andrew sat alone on the porch. He thought about how Charlotte had so easily left and possibly moved on to someone with deeper pockets. The pain of her betrayal cut deep. But as he gazed at the endless expanse of sky, he also felt a sense of perspective. Life went on regardless of his fortunes. His thoughts turned to Clara. She was the one who stood by him, comforting him during his darkest hours, offering a place to stay and a kindness he had rarely known. A quiet affection stirred in his heart. The day might come soon when he would need to speak that truth. Down to the last dollar. Despite living in a simpler home with fewer expenses, Andrew still struggled to manage the debts lingering from his bankrupt empire. Legal fees alone were draining what little savings he had left. He picked up small jobs where he could consulting for a local construction firm, doing freelance writing about sustainable building practices, but these gigs barely covered basic needs. He hadn't yet told Clara how desperate his finances were becoming. He felt guilty enough that he was living under her roof. The last thing he wanted was to admit they might soon be unable to afford basic utilities. A turning point came one blistering hot afternoon. The old air conditioner broke. In the city, he would have called a technician immediately, but now he didn't have the money for that. Clara saw him hunched over the machine outside, tinkering with tools he barely knew how to use. "What are you doing?" she asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I'm trying to fix this thing," he said. "We can't afford a repairman right now." She frowned, realization dawning in her eyes. "It's that bad, isn't it?" Andrew exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Yeah, it's that bad." Clara studied him, then glanced at the sputtering air conditioner. "Let me see if I can help," she said, kneeling beside him. "My grandmother fixed this old unit a bunch of times. Maybe I can remember a trick or two." They worked side by side, carefully inspecting wires and fiddling with the rusted parts. They were covered in dirt and sweat, but at one point they both laughed when Clara smudged grease on Andrew's cheek. It was a moment of closeness, the kind that made Andrew's heart flutter. He couldn't recall the last time he and Charlotte had worked on anything together with such a shared sense of purpose. After a few hours of trial and error, the air conditioner sputtered to life, blowing cool air for the first time in days. Andrew cheered, and Clara laughed, relief washing over her face. They high-fived like kids, both beaming at their small victory. That evening, the house felt a little cooler, and so did Andrew's spirit. He realized that, while he had lost material wealth, he had gained something new, a sense of partnership he had never experienced in his marriage. Clara didn't care about fancy things or designer clothes. She cared about him and the house they now shared, even if it was old and creaky. Before going to bed, Andrew paused at Clara's door. He wanted to knock, to say something about how grateful he was for her presence, but the words stuck in his throat. Finally, he returned to his room, resolving to find a better time to express his feelings. A tense visit. Andrew's days settled into a routine of careful budgeting, small freelance jobs, and cleaning up the property. He took pride in patching up the fence and clearing weeds from the garden. Clara started planting vegetables in a small patch by the side of the house, hoping they could save money on groceries. Their life was humble, but it had a quiet rhythm that felt strangely comforting. One afternoon, a car pulled up. Andrew looked out the window, surprised to see Charlotte stepping out in sunglasses, holding a designer purse. His heart raced. He hadn't seen her since she left him, and he had hoped never to face her again in such uncertain circumstances. Clara was in the kitchen, but she heard the commotion and came to the door. Andrew stepped outside, bracing himself for whatever reason Charlotte had come. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes filled with impatience. "Andrew," she said tersely, "I need to talk to you." He glanced at the flashy car behind her, a new model, definitely not something she had when she was with him. "All right," he replied, stepping off the porch. "What is it?" "I heard about the bankruptcy proceedings," she began. "My lawyer told me that some of your properties were in both our names. I want to make sure I'm not liable for anything." Andrew clenched his jaw. It was just like her to show up only when something affected her own interests. "You left. I assumed you'd handle your own legal issues," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Charlotte's gaze flickered to the small house, a look of disdain crossing her face. "Look, I just need you to sign some documents saying you release any claim on my personal assets. In exchange, I'll release any claim on yours." Andrew's mouth went dry. She was still worried about material things. He thought about how different she was from Clara, who was inside, probably worried about him. He took a moment to steady himself. "That's fine," he answered. "Send them to my lawyer." She hesitated, noticing the strain in his voice. "I didn't think you'd sink this low. Living out here, practically a beggar. I never thought I'd see you so diminished." He felt anger surge. "I may have lost my fortune," he said quietly, "but I'm not a beggar. And I'm not alone, Charlotte. You should leave." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, scanning the property. "I guess that's the maid's car," she muttered under her breath. "Good luck, Andrew. I hope you find happiness in this place." She turned and strode back to her car, leaving Andrew seething. He watched her drive off in a cloud of dust. A part of him wanted to shout after her, to tell her she had lost the best parts of him when she walked away. But he kept silent, swallowing his pride. Clara stepped onto the porch, her hands nervously gripping a dish towel. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her concern evident. Andrew forced a smile. "I'll be fine. She just wanted to make sure she wouldn't lose any money." Clara's face softened with sympathy. She stepped closer. "I'm sorry." He let out a long breath. "Don't be. I'm actually relieved. She can do whatever she wants. I don't care anymore." Clara nodded, and they stood there for a moment, the weight of Charlotte's visit settling like a thick cloud. Then, without warning, Andrew reached out and gently touched Clara's hand. "Thank you for caring," he said. "It means more than you know." She squeezed his hand in return, her eyes warm. "You're welcome." Growing closer, something changed after Charlotte's visit. Andrew felt a sense of closure, a final break from his old life. He realized he no longer pined for the wife who left him when times got hard. Instead, he felt a deeper appreciation for Clara, the woman who stayed despite his downfall. They continued to share daily chores and small victories. Every day, Clara's presence became a stronger source of comfort. They laughed over the simplest things, like the time they tried to bake bread but forgot the yeast. The result was a hard, flat disaster, and they ended up eating peanut butter sandwiches instead. In another life, Andrew would have been furious over such a mishap. Now, he found it funny, especially with Clara giggling beside him. One evening, after dinner, they found themselves sitting on the porch again. A soft glow from the living room lamp cast shadows around them. "I love this time of night," she said. "It's peaceful." Andrew nodded, his gaze drifting to her profile. She looked different than she did in the city, a bit sun-kissed, her hair tied in a loose ponytail, her cheeks flushed from the day's work. He was struck by her beauty in that moment, simple yet radiant. Spurred by a sudden burst of courage, he reached for her hand. She turned to him, surprised. "Clara," he began, voice trembling slightly, "I want to thank you. Not just for letting me stay here, but for showing me what kindness really is." She squeezed his hand, her eyes bright. "I did what anyone decent would do." "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "Most people would have left. You didn't. You've been a better friend." He hesitated, correcting himself. "A better companion than I ever deserved." Her eyes glistened with tears. "Andrew," she began softly, then fell silent, as if struggling to find the right words. He felt an unspoken tenderness pass between them. Before either of them could say more, a chilly gust of wind made Clara shiver. Andrew, still holding her hand, guided her inside. The moment passed, but it lingered in his mind long after they said goodnight. A new purpose. Andrew woke the next morning with a sense of resolve. He decided he couldn't just drift through life. He needed a plan to rebuild in a way that aligned with what he now valued. After breakfast, he asked Clara if she wouldn't mind taking a ride with him to the local town center. "I want to look for opportunities," he explained. "I'm tired of waiting for my old contacts to call." She agreed, and they drove to the small strip of shops and businesses that formed the heart of the town. Andrew talked to a few people, asking about local construction projects or community developments. Though the town was small, there was a sense of optimism among the residents. They wanted to grow while maintaining their rural charm. One store owner recognized Andrew's name from the sustainable building projects he once championed in the city. "I heard about your company," the man said. "It's a shame what happened. But if you're interested in helping us improve our community center, we could sure use some advice." Andrew's eyes lit up. "I'd love to help in any way I can. My fee is negotiable," he added sheepishly, aware he could no longer command premium rates. The man grinned. "We don't have a big budget, but we can pay something." Andrew exchanged details, feeling a surge of hope. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar deal, but it was a chance to do something meaningful. Clara, who had been quietly standing by, looked proud of him. "You're on the right track," she whispered. He nodded, feeling his heart swell with gratitude. He realized it wasn't the size of the deal that mattered. It was the purpose behind it. He wanted to help make lives better, even if it was on a smaller scale than before. A confession of love. The weeks that followed saw Andrew immersing himself in local projects. He gave input on eco-friendly renovations for the community center, consulted for a new coffee shop wanting to use sustainable materials, and even helped the town council brainstorm ways to attract small businesses. People were drawn to his knowledge and humble attitude. Though he wasn't earning much, he felt enriched in ways he never had when he was chasing billions. And through it all, Clara was his rock. She kept the small house tidy, looked after him, and cheered him on. Their bond grew stronger. They shared more smiles and inside jokes. They took walks in the evenings, exploring the quiet backroads that Clara knew so well from her childhood visits. One particularly beautiful evening, they found themselves strolling by a small creek. The setting sun painted the sky in pink and orange hues. Clara bent down to pick a wildflower, and Andrew's heart pounded at the simple grace of her actions. "Clara," he said softly, taking the flower from her hand and twirling it between his fingers. She stood up, looking at him with anticipation. "What is it?" His throat tightened. He had faced business giants, closed massive deals, but confessing his feelings to Clara felt more daunting than any board meeting. Still, he mustered the courage. I've been thinking about how you've been there for me, how you've shown me what real support looks like. And He paused, feeling his eyes grow moist. "I've fallen in love with you." A soft gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes shone with tears as she reached for his hands. "Andrew," she whispered, stepping closer, "I've felt the same way for a while now. I just never dared to hope." They stood under the warm glow of the setting sun, each searching the other's face for confirmation. Then, as if pulled by the same force, they leaned in for a gentle, tender kiss. The air around them seemed to still, the world holding its breath at the union of two hearts that had once been strangers under the same roof. When they pulled apart, Andrew rested his forehead against Clara's. "I'm sorry it took so long for me to realize," he murmured. She smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks. Better late than never. They walked back home hand in hand, a contentment settling in Andrew's heart that he had never known before. This was real, this was genuine, and for the first time since his empire began to collapse, he felt truly alive. Tests and trials. Their relationship, while full of love, didn't come without challenges. Both knew that Andrew was still swimming in debt, and the future was uncertain. Gossip in the town intensified when people realized the former billionaire was living with his maid and, not just living with her, but clearly in love with her. Some neighbors gossiped, calling Clara a gold digger who had seized her chance when Andrew was vulnerable. Others claimed Andrew was only using Clara for support. But those who truly knew them saw the honesty of their bond. Andrew tried not to let the whispers get to him, but Clara felt hurt by the rumors. She worried people might think she was taking advantage of Andrew's situation. One morning, while Clara was getting groceries, she overheard two women at the checkout line whispering about them. Clara's chest felt tight, and she returned home in tears. Andrew was out consulting for the community center, so she was alone in her heartbreak. When Andrew came back and found Clara crying in the living room, he knelt beside her, alarmed. "What's wrong?" he asked, gently brushing her hair aside. She sniffled, struggling to speak. "People, they say I'm with you for money." Andrew's face darkened. He took her hands in his. "That's ridiculous. You were there for me when I had nothing." She nodded, tears still streaming. "I know, but it hurts. I can't stop thinking about it." Andrew pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his shoulder. "Let them talk," he whispered. "We know the truth. You stayed when everyone else left. You saved me, Clara." She clung to him, finding comfort in his steady presence. "I don't want them to hurt you with their lies." Andrew stroked her back. "They can't hurt me anymore. I've lost everything once. Rumors are nothing in comparison. The important thing is that we stick together." That night, they spoke about their dreams and decided to push forward despite the gossip. Andrew comforted Clara by reminding her that every small town has its share of rumors, and eventually people would see that their love was genuine. Renewed hope, meanwhile, Andrew's work with the local community center was bringing him new respect in the town. People saw that he wasn't just a man chasing wealth anymore. He genuinely cared about sustainable development and improving local lives. Word spread that Andrew Caldwell was a changed man, a more grounded, approachable person than the arrogant billionaire some expected. Funds were limited, but Andrew used his connections and expertise to secure a grant from a regional charitable foundation for the community center's expansion. The town was thrilled, and the local newspaper ran a story praising Andrew's efforts. Slowly, the negative gossip about him and Clara began to fade, replaced by appreciation for what he was doing. One afternoon, as Andrew and Clara walked through the main street, the store owner who once recognized Andrew called them over. "Hey, Caldwell," he shouted with a grin. "Great job with the funding. I heard the project's going to break ground next month." Andrew returned the smile. "Thanks, we're excited to get started." Clara beamed beside him, her hand loosely around his arm. The acceptance from the community felt like a victory, one they had earned through honesty and hard work. They later celebrated in their modest home with a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables from Clara's little garden. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, candlelight dancing on their faces. Because the overhead bulb had burnt out earlier that day, Andrew reached across the table, taking Clara's hand in his. "To new beginnings," he toasted, holding up a glass of water since they couldn't afford wine. She clinked her glass with his. "To love and second chances," she added, smiling brightly. The shadows of the past, just when Andrew thought his life was stabilizing. An unexpected letter arrived from a city law firm. It was addressed to both Andrew and Clara, which puzzled them. Andrew opened it, dread coiling in his gut. The letter stated that a new lawsuit was being filed against Andrew by former associates who claimed he had been negligent in his financial dealings, causing them significant losses. But this time, they were also trying to drag Clara into it, alleging she was hiding Andrew's assets in her property. Clara looked at Andrew, eyes wide with fear. They can't do this, can they? She asked in a shaky voice. Andrew read the letter again. Anger building. They're trying to scare us. They think if they name you, they'll force me to settle. He crumpled the letter. I won't let them ruin your life. Clara placed a trembling hand on his arm. What do we do? He inhaled sharply. First, I need to call my lawyer. We'll fight this. They have no grounds. The following days were fraught with tension. Andrew spent hours on the phone with lawyers, gathering evidence to show Clara never received any illegal funds. He was determined to protect her at all costs. The idea that his failures could now harm the woman he loved made him furious. Clara, for her part, tried to stay calm, offering moral support, but the stress took a toll. One night, Andrew found her crying quietly at the kitchen table, the open letter in front of her. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. It's going to be okay, he whispered, pressing a kiss to her temple. She tried to smile. I know. It's just hard. I'm not used to legal threats. He turned her around so they were face to face. I'll fix this, he promised. I won't let them drag you down with me. She nodded, tears glistening. I trust you. Though the lawsuit loomed over them, they found solace in each other. Andrew worked tirelessly, determined that this threat wouldn't destroy the life they were building. It reminded him of how quickly the shadows of the past could reach into the present. But now, he wasn't facing them alone. Standing together, in a show of solidarity, the community stood behind Andrew and Clara when news of the lawsuit leaked. The local council members he had helped wrote letters vouching for his integrity. The store owner started a petition claiming Andrew was a valued member of the town. Even the local newspaper ran an editorial criticizing the distant city law firm for attacking a small-town resident with baseless claims. Every gesture touched Andrew deeply. For once, he felt appreciated for who he was rather than what he was worth. Clara beamed every time a new letter of support arrived, posting them on the fridge as a reminder that they had allies. Finally, Andrew's lawyer called with good news. The lawsuit had been dropped. The plaintiffs realized they had no case, especially after seeing the show of support from the town. Clara wasn't liable for anything, and Andrew was clear of that threat. When Andrew shared the news with Clara, she burst into relieved laughter. They danced around the living room, tears of joy streaming down their cheeks. The sense of freedom was overwhelming. The gloom that had haunted them lifted, replaced by a renewed optimism. Unexpected opportunity. A few months later, as the community center project neared completion, the investor had been following Andrew's efforts in the town through social media and local news. Impressed by Andrew's dedication to sustainable building, the investor wanted to partner on a new an affordable housing initiative that combined eco-friendly practices with low-cost construction. Andrew was stunned. Why me? He asked. You could hire any experienced firm in the city. The investor chuckled. I've seen what your fancy ex-partners are doing chasing quick returns. I want someone who's proven they care about making a real difference. From what I've gathered, that's you now. Andrew hung up, excitement and nerves buzzing through him. Immediately he found Clara outside, tending to her garden, and shared the news. Her eyes lit up with pride. This is amazing, Andrew. It's what you've always wanted, to build something meaningful. He nodded, feeling a swirl of emotions. But I'm worried. Taking on a big project again. What if I fail? She stood, brushing dirt off her hands, and cradled his face gently. You won't fail, and even if there are challenges, I'll be there with you. He wrapped her in a tight embrace. Thank you, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The proposal as Andrew moved forward with the investor's plans. He and Clara spent long nights at the kitchen table, talking through ideas. Her practicality balanced his enthusiasm. They made a strong team, and it felt natural for them to support each other's strengths. Andrew realized he wanted this partnership not just in business, but in life. One evening, while Clara was finishing up the dishes, Andrew quietly slipped away and returned with a small jewelry box he had bought earlier that week. Money was still tight, so it wasn't a grand diamond ring like the ones Charlotte used to wear. It was a simple band set with a modest, clear stone that sparkled in the light. He took a deep breath, heart pounding, and approached Clara. Her eyes went wide. "Andrew, what?" He looked up at her, emotions swirling in his gaze. "Clara, you stood by me when I had nothing. You showed me what love really means. I can't imagine facing the future without you. Will you marry me?" Tears immediately welled up in her eyes. She covered her mouth with her hands, nodding before she could speak. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, Andrew." He slipped the ring on her finger and rose to pull her into a tight embrace. They held each other for a long moment, the taste of salt on their lips from both of their happy tears. In that simple kitchen, with the hum of the fridge and the soft glow of the overhead light, Andrew felt he had finally found the treasure he'd been missing all his life. A simple, beautiful wedding. They decided on a modest wedding in the small town. Friends from the community offered to help with decorations and food. The ceremony took place under an old oak tree by the creek, where Andrew had first confessed his love. Clara wore a simple white dress, and Andrew wore a second-hand suit. Their eyes were only on each other. When Clara walked down the makeshift aisle, Andrew felt his heart might burst from his chest. He thought about his journey, how he went from a high-flying billionaire with a shallow marriage to a man humbled by loss and rescued by genuine love. His eyes filled with tears as Clara reached him, looking radiant and confident. "I promise to love you," he said softly, holding her hands. "Not just when life is easy, but even more when it's hard. Because we've seen hard times, and we faced them together." Clara's voice trembled with emotion. "I promise to stand by you, support your dreams, and share my hopes with you. You showed me that real love isn't about money or status. It's about commitment, kindness, and respect." They exchanged rings, sealed their vows with a tender kiss, and the crowd cheered. The reception was simple but joyful homemade food, lively music from a local band, and plenty of laughter. Under the strings of twinkling lights, Andrew and Clara danced their first dance as husband and wife, completely lost in each other's embrace. In the months that followed, Andrew's new affordable housing project gained traction. Together with the investor and local authorities, they built homes that were both eco-friendly and accessible to families of modest means. News outlets started covering the success of this new venture, praising Andrew for reinventing himself and using his expertise for a greater cause. Clara pursued her dream of studying nursing, enrolling in a nearby vocational program that allowed her to attend classes a few days a week. Andrew made sure to adjust his schedule to support her, dropping her off at the small campus and picking her up later. They encouraged each other's ambitions, each proud of the other's growth. They continued living in Clara's grandmother's house. Though Andrew's finances improved, they chose not to move back to a big city or buy a lavish mansion. They had come to love their cozy, quiet life, close to the community they adored. Andrew made enough to pay off his old debts and still enjoy modest comforts. He occasionally laughed to think how he had once thought a giant estate was the only measure of success. Now real success was found in the warm meals he shared with Clara, the small garden they tended, and the home that was filled with laughter instead of empty echoes. The townspeople admired how far Andrew and Clara had come. Many approached them for advice on everything from home repairs to relationship woes. Andrew was no longer just that fallen billionaire. He was a neighbor, a friend, a man who understood hardship, And Clara was no longer just a maid. She was a respected nursing student, a loving wife, and someone who inspired others with her compassion. On weekends, they often spent time at the creek or taking long drives through the countryside. Sometimes they talked about the future, maybe having children one day, maybe expanding Andrew's business to help even more communities. But they never forgot to cherish the present moment, mindful of how easily life can change. In the end, Andrew Caldwell and Clara found happiness that went beyond money or status. Their love story was born in the ashes of a collapsing empire, but it rose to become a beacon of hope for anyone who believed that kindness and commitment could outshine wealth. Through every twist and turn, they proved that real riches are found in the hearts of those who stand by you when the world turns its back. And so, in a small, quiet town far from the glittering lights of the city, a former billionaire and his once-ignored maid lived a life filled with love, respect, and simple joys. The world around them might never fully understand how they came together, but they knew that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters.